Ganbei.
Ganbei, Alex, how are you?
Uh, Very well, thank you. Very well.
Little birdies tell me that you're in a car right now.
Yes, I'm sitting in the car in the factory, hoping that there will be no loud banging happening during this talk.
Okay, and
Not from the
hopefully,
car, not from the car, but from outside.
yeah, and hopefully nobody will come knocking on your window and asking why you're sitting and talking to yourself for hours.
Yeah, they're more likely just to ask me about some stupid thing about the project. But yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen. It's Sunday, so it's quite quiet on site today. A few people here, but a relatively quiet one.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So our topic today is recruiting and talent management.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think in every company in the world, it's not just China that the your employees are your most valuable assets, and they are also, the assets that you really need to keep motivated and use them to their full potential to achieve your own targets and the targets of the company. And that's why in all the companies that I've been in, when I've been in a management position, I have felt that HR is by far the most important. The HR function is by far the most important support department of the company.
Just to establish your subject matter expertise, how many people have you hired and fired or fired during your
Oh,
career?
this I can't count, but it's sort of like, the larger companies that you go in. I was in one company where we had almost 600 employees, but of course, for a company, a large company like that, the lower end of the scale, the workers, the general manager won't be hiring. That's the sort of the lower end of the people, but normally, as a general manager, someone who is either middle management to senior management, of course, you'll be very involved. And also if the position is of particular importance. So, for example, procurement, you're always involved, and sales, you're always involved, because procurement is a very delicate subject in China. It's a subject where you really have to. It's a function that you really have to keep a close eye on, because it's extremely easy to have financial problems. And then sales is your window to the outside world. So generally in the past, I've always been very involved in those two, in the hiring of those two positions. But yeah, I don't know, maybe 100 people, I'm guessing, my last
Hired or
in the
fired?
time. Hired, fired, not so many. And also, the other thing when we're talking about it is that in China, it's quite common for management to be a little bit more mobile than they are maybe in some Western countries. And for a manager to stay within the company for 2 to 3 years is seen as being quite an accomplishment. So of course, you will have some long-term people who are, with the company, for 10 years plus. But in general, if you have someone who stays and works productively in the company for 3 years before they leave, then you've done quite well. You must have used that person or set up the conditions for that person to feel that they sort of have a good environment to work in.
On a high level, what are the main differences that a new person or new manager who's about to recruit Chinese employees, what he should know outright?
Well, I think that the first thing is that it's very important that when you are looking for a person, that you have the job description very clear, that you can explain to your own company, to yourself, and also to the new person who comes for the interview, what they'll be doing. Of course, there are some things that will come up later that may change, but especially when you're starting a new company, you might find that you are hoping that people will be extremely flexible and want to do a little, and you would expect them to do a little bit of everything. But in general, people are when they're coming for a job interview, they want to know more or less exactly what they'll be doing. So this is one thing that you need to prepare yourself. If you're replacing a person, then the job description is there, and you know clearly what this function will be doing. In a new company or a new position, then things will be a little bit fluid. But before you start recruiting, you should make sure that yourself is very clear about what function you want this new person to be carrying out. I think this is one of the basic things. The other thing is that in general, in China, people are used to a very structuralized way of work. So when you hire people, you should also make it very clear who is their direct boss and who they will manage. Because of course, there are always exceptions, but in general, Chinese people don't work so well in a matrix-type management style where they report to more than one person, and it's much easier for them to understand, especially at the lower levels. It's crucial that they know that this person is their boss. They know that there are other people in the company, but this is the one person that they listen to for their instructions and that they report to. This is very clear. This is very important that it needs to be clear. And especially in new companies, it can be quite fluid, and that can be quite a challenge for some employees.
What I've noticed, we recruited our first team, five people about a year ago when we entered the Chinese market. And in Finland, well, first of all, Finland is a small country, and our company is small, or small to medium sized. And what we noticed is that I think it's an issue of small countries and small companies where most employees are more or less like generalists. So they have, maybe a focus on one area, but they can easily do other tasks, and they're comfortable doing other tasks. But I've noticed in Russia and also in China, where there's lots of a large pool of employees, that employees highly specify or focus on one area, and they are not comfortable in doing anything outside of their narrow scope of expertise.
Yes, and people have their areas of responsibility, and they will make sure that those things are done. But if there are things that fall outside of their responsibility, you will find in general that staff will not react to those challenges. Sometimes, of course, you have someone who is more open thinking and able to think outside the box, and they will see issues and correct them themselves. But in general, if it's something that is not on their job description, they will leave it alone.
And I've noticed that if you explicitly ask somebody to do something extra, which appears that it's going to be an ongoing responsibility, then there is a salary increase request following right after that.
Yes. And the other thing is, it's we shouldn't generalize, but it's quite common for Chinese people to equate the job that they do, the responsibility that they have, with their income. And if they see that they are providing more service or more responsibility, then they very quickly want to link that to their income. So if you give someone new responsibilities, you will need sooner or later to make a wage increase or to make a wage adjustment. Unfortunately, sometimes people, what they don't see is that if wages should go up for more responsibility, then it's natural that you would think that wages should come down if their responsibilities have been reduced. But that's a very difficult concept for people to understand.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I think, like you mentioned, while writing a job description, it's quite important to really spend time on that and think what exactly this person will be doing. Otherwise, there's immediately, a conflict in the air.
Yeah, I think that when people before they come to the job, before they start working, it's good if they have as close an understanding as possible of what is really expected from them. Because if you come into a job and it's extremely different to what you were expecting, then of course you'll feel a little bit disappointed, but also you'll probably wonder, if you really should have taken the job, and can you perform in the way that you were hoping to perform when you took the job. And the same thing for the employer. If they write a job description that is different to the actual job, they will probably be looking for the wrong people as well.
Yeah, yeah. How do you see Chinese employees reacting or feeling towards the Western supervisor as opposed to Chinese supervisor?
I think one thing with Western supervisors, and this of course is probably a generalization, that they are much more lenient and accepting with Chinese staff than a Chinese manager. A Chinese manager is, in general, someone who says, this is how things are going to be done, and you will do them. And if they don't do them, then there's trouble straight away. But with the Western manager, they are often more willing to listen, and in many cases, this is very positive, because sometimes what happens with the Chinese manager is people don't dare to tell them the truth. And so then if you don't know the actual situation, you also can't work together to solve it. But on one thing that I've seen, and especially I shouldn't say especially for smaller areas, but in general, the further you get away from Beijing and Shanghai, the further the bigger the distance between the cultures of Western managers and Chinese staff. And sometimes, staff will see the understanding of a Western manager as a weakness. And some people will then try to use that. They see that leniency as a weakness, will try to use that, to their advantage. On the other hand, another issue that I've seen is that if there are problems with the company, production or whatever problems, often Chinese staff feel nervous about letting their boss know the actual situation. And if they're asked about it, if they're asked, this, for example, this permit that you have asked for the staff, to apply for, there may be some problems with getting the permit, but they feel a little bit embarrassed, to tell their boss that they're not able to get the permit as quickly as they were hoping. And so sometimes you have to be really quite not tough, but very, very direct and very detailed when you are getting information from your staff. Of course, you want to, you want them to be honest with you, but you also want to make sure to get this honesty from staff, they also have to feel that they have a certain relationship with you. And it's a relationship more, I would say, like father and son. It's not. It's maybe not the type of relationship that we would expect in the West between, two people who are working in the same company. One person is senior, one person is working for them. It's more of I would say, a father-son, father-daughter type of relationship, where the senior manager is the father figure, and then he is giving support, instructions, and looking after their staff, and then the staff member is reporting to him at obviously he considers that his boss is much more than just a friend, but also someone to look up to. So it's in that way, a Western manager has to sort of learn the ropes, when he comes to China, about how to deal with staff, because this is really quite different to a Western working relationship.
Yeah. I know in Russia, employees feel very uncomfortable in situations where they have lots of room, they have lots of freedom. They really like to have, spanked like a dog, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have very tight rules for what you need to be doing with your day, then it's very easy to do that. But if your boss just says to you, "Oh, I want you to make the company run better," then a lot of people would find that very difficult. But if the boss said, "I want you to make sure the windows are clean every day," then it's very easy. You just clean the windows and you're happy. And so, of course, that's an oversimplified uh, example. But in general, if you make it very clear for your staff exactly what they should be doing, then a lot of staff will be happier about it. Of course, there's other staff who is more ambitious, that is able to manage themselves and their time better. But on the whole, a lot of staff are really expecting to be told in quite some detail what they should be doing. I've seen sort of people talking about the difference of the difference in the relationship between Western staff and their boss and Chinese staff and their boss. And in the West, if you have a problem, the boss will be part of solving that problem, but also you will be expected to bring to the boss, your plan of attack. How are you going to solve this problem? But quite often in China, what happens as soon as things start to get a little bit difficult, the employee will call the boss or come to the boss and say, "I was supposed to get this done. I cannot get it done. Please help." And then the boss has to basically do the job of the staff to find the problem, to analyze it, to go through it together with the staff, and then tell them how to do it. But this is maybe something that's come with their history, where it's the positions of power have been very strong, and the people underneath them haven't had many rights, and therefore they often people at a lower level, they are looking as soon as something slightly not normal happens, then they will go straight to their boss and ask them for advice how to solve the problem. And as a manager, if you have a lot of people reporting to you, you will find that you'll be spending a lot of your time solving their problems that maybe in the West a staff member would think about the problem more before he came to their manager to ask for assistance.
I would expect this type of behavior from a lower level employees, but in Russia, I've seen that even direct level employees go immediately, for example, to the CEO just with the problem that now we have this problem. What do we do? Instead of offering a solution. Is it?
Yeah, I think one problem, or one of the reasons for this, is that often people think that if they try to solve a problem by themselves and they fail, that they will be in big trouble. So it's much better to let your boss know about the problem, and then he can give his suggestion. Maybe you give advice, but he can give his suggestion. You try his suggestion, and if his suggestion doesn't work, then you won't be in trouble.
It's not your fault.
Exactly. And I know that a lot of HR people in China. I had one of my HR employees in the past was doing a lot of training about trying to get people to take control of the problems, and it's a two-way street, because as a manager, you have to give your staff the tools so that they can analyze and think about the problems. And then you also have to make it clear to the staff, the boundaries of where they can make decisions for themselves and where they really need to let, their manager know before they make decisions. But in general, you should be very clear that as long as the decision-making theory that they use to come to their own problem solution or solution for the problem is sound, then they should not be in trouble if that decision was wrong. Yeah. So, and that's I think quite important that if they make a decision, because for staff, as they become more senior and more experienced, they will, you hope, take more responsibility for making decisions in non-routine situations. And you really need to be very clear to them that if they have made if they have used good logic to come up with a solution, that even if it goes wrong, that you're not going to bite their head off, and then they'll have the be brave enough to tell you what's happened, but two, they'll also be brave enough to start making more decisions and become a more competent manager through just practice of dealing with problems.
Yeah, that's the same methodology from in coaching youth sports, that you should not commend the end result but the actual intent of the of the player.
Yeah. So I mean, and this is the other issue when you're hiring people, is sometimes, and I've had this example just a couple of days ago on this project that I'm working on. The company here in China, they have employed a new team. It's all new. It's a new location, a new factory that they're building, and they've employed one lady who was an admin lady in a company in this area before. She's only been working for Chinese companies in the past, so this is the first time that she's dealing with a foreign company. And there was one issue where we had a supplier on site, and he was doing some contract work, and we noticed that there was a certain aspect of danger in the work that he was doing. So of course we asked him to stop, and we asked him to correct. And while he was correcting, his senior manager came out and saw the site, and he realized that there was an element of risk, and so he stopped the work, and he left the site. He pulled that company off the site, and we then got another supplier to continue the work, with the safety precautions made, and of course, we had to cancel the old contract. He had to refund his prepayments, and we had to go ahead with the new contractor. And the admin lady, the manager that's working on this project, he knew the situation. I also knew the situation, but then I was seeing emails from the admin lady to the finance lady who's sitting in another city, saying that the old company was unable to make a VAT tax invoice, and so we have changed suppliers. And I was wondering, why, where does this email come from? Does she know? Or was she not told, or was she not told correctly? So I asked the engineer on site if the admin lady knew the real situation. Yes, she knows the real situation. So then when I asked her, I said, why did you send an email like this? And she said, because, there was a risk of danger, and that's why, that company left. And I thought it was very difficult to explain to the finance lady. So if I made up this story, then it's very easy for everyone to understand. And I think that in Chinese companies, this is more common, that people are telling the stories in the way that they think the listener would like to listen. And I told her, I said, look, one is your managers, they all know what's happening. So even if the finance manager doesn't know, then even if she queries the situation, because we know the real situation, we can explain to her, so it's not a problem. So I said, please, in the future, when you're working for us as a Western company, we expect the truth at all times. And this sort of, like white lie or making up information, often people will do it not because, they try to cause harm or, they want to cause any problems, but they think that by having a good cover story for the problem, then everybody can accept it easily, and there'll be no questions about it.
In the recruiting process, now we have defined the key job responsibilities and understand the risks. How would I go about finding potential candidates?
Well, it really depends, but what for the lower level jobs, for like a worker in a factory or a worker position, I would always ask the current workers to introduce relatives and friends, because this is a good way to do it. With a worker, you want someone who is living close to the factory, You want someone that has a relationship with some of the other workers in the factory, so you know that they will fit in. And you know, in a previous company, when we had, you know, those 600 odd people, about 450 of those were workers, and all of those people we had recruited locally because we wanted local people, and it was either through word of mouth from the workers themselves, or we would go and put job advertisements around the villages, or when they had in where I was before in Yunnan, they often have weekly markets. So if you go to the market square in the village on the market day, the whole village will be there, and then you can hand out flyers and put posters up to say that you're looking for staff. So for workers, you know, that's how we did it. Quite often companies or factories are in industrial zones. And in the industrial zones, they will have a service provided by the local government to look for workers, and you can just go and, you know, put a sign up that you want 3 workers, you know, basic workers, male, female. You put your age. Yeah, that's the other thing in China. You're allowed to have, you're allowed to request men or women, and you're allowed to have a certain age requirement. So for lower level workers, it's normally through word of mouth, or, you know, just a simple job ad on the local bulletin board, or, you know, like a market square. That's the best way for that. As you get more senior, the searching for the people becomes more difficult. Nowadays, most people are using the internet. And there are a few job sites that are quite well known. For example, 51 Job or Jalpin.com. It's very, very, I'd say it's the biggest one. We in the companies that I've worked for the very senior positions, we have used recruiters. But recruiters, as you may or may not know, are quite expensive, and that they normally are asking for between 20 to 30% of the candidate's first year wage to be paid by the company as their reward as their payment for finding people. So generally, this is, you know, you're looking at general managers, CEOs, or if you're looking for someone with a particular skill that you can't find through general internet advertising, you'll have to go for recruitment services.
Yeah, I've noticed recruiting services, the incentives are not always aligned with, for example, us. We're looking for employees and the recruiting companies, because they optimize the conversion. Basically, they want to find as many matches as possible. So I think it's worth to keep in mind that when they give their analysis of potential candidates, that it's always biased towards being more positive than it's maybe actually be.
Yeah, I think, I mean, because, you know, I've been working only in China for the past 20 years, so I don't have any experience with overseas recruiters, but I guess that the issue is an international one, that, you know, companies, when they look for people, obviously, if they're going to pay, you know, 20 to 30% of the year's salary to find people, then obviously they think it's very important, and they can't do it by themselves. And we know that people who are looking for work find it very difficult to get a job, or else, you know, everybody would be employed, and we know that everybody is not employed. So obviously there is a mixed match between the employees and the employers. And to be honest, I have never really been extremely impressed by recruitment companies. Some are definitely better than others, but I would never say that there is one recruitment company that is perfect. And probably if you talk to those guys, they will say it's also a real science, you know, to how can you go ahead and find the right people for the company when, you know, that, I mean, all they can do is, you know, have a big enough net to try and get as many candidates and many CVs as they can, and then from that information, how do they then work out who is most suitable? So what you'll find often is that when you give a recruitment company a job, they will immediately start ringing around all your competition to ask if those people in the same position are interested to leave. And I also think that that is not good, because especially if you're in a growing industry, for example, I've recently been in the swine industry, the pig industry, and in China this is going through a huge growth at the moment. And companies are growing like crazy. They can't find people, so what they're doing is that they are stealing people in similar positions from other companies. So you talk to one guy and you think he's in company A, but in fact now he's in company C, and in the last 2 years he's been for 1.5 years with company B. So it's completely in a state of chaos. And I think that recruiting companies are partly to blame for that, because as soon as you say I want a technical officer for a certain field, they will just go on the internet and they'll look at all those similar companies. In fact, they might even ask you, who else is a large company in your sector in China, and they will find those people through LinkedIn or through whatever other ways they have who are doing similar jobs, and they will just approach them directly. And this, of course, for the recruitment company, it's effective, but maybe, in the long run development of industries, it's not so good if you have people constantly being stolen from similar companies. That's also not good in the long run.
Yeah. And how much do you think people would ask premium in terms of salary when you're a new company opening up offices, and there's obvious risks that you may not succeed and have to close down?
Yeah, well, this is also something that's quite interesting, because of course, the company, if you take a company from Finland or from wherever to China, you're very familiar with your own company, and you believe that your company in Finland might be, very big company that everybody knows. But when you go to China, even if you're the number one company in Finland, you go to China, probably not many people know your company. And I think quite a lot of people are surprised that when they start advertising for staff, that they don't get much response. And their thinking is, but we're a very well-known company. And it's true, maybe you're well-known in Finland, or you're well-known in Australia, or wherever you're coming from. But when you come to China, nobody knows you. And that's one thing when you look at wage levels. If you look at the very large, very well-known companies, for example, I use Western companies, for example, if it is Nokia, or if it is Cargill, or if it is I'm just trying to think, Coca-Cola, for example, companies that everybody knows in the world, and in China, of course, they're well known. Then when you are seeing the wage levels for similar positions, like in Coca-Cola or in another company, you'll see that Coca-Cola will probably pay a little bit less than the market average. They won't be paying much less, but they definitely won't be paying more. And the reason is that in China, when people know, just like, this is also quite similar to the West, but in China, when people see that they have an opportunity to work for a famous company, they know that this will be looking very good on their CV, and they're prepared, to take the company even if the wage is not as high as a similar position with a less known company. So this is definitely a factor for you if you're starting and you're not well known in the country, that people will be hesitant to join you. And so if they're hesitant to join, then your wage level needs to be a little bit higher.
If we talk about upper management or white collar workers, besides salary, what other compensations do they value, which should be part of the compensation mix?
Yeah, well, I see nowadays that a lot of, especially the internet startup companies in China, even though they're very large now, they often give stock options. It's like in the US. You get stock options, you get profit bonuses, and in fact, one thing that I've noticed with Chinese companies is that in general, your monthly wage will be lower in a Chinese company, but your bonuses and possibilities for earning more money if the company performs are much, much better than in a Western company. So if you're in a Chinese company that does well in that year, you will be having very nice bonuses at the end of the year. Your monthly wage will be low, but at the end of the year, you are coming out well ahead of a manager who's working for a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi or a company like that, where they have much smaller profit, much smaller percentage of overall income is given to bonuses, is given in the form of bonuses.
And I think the similar analogy can be used for days off or vacation time, which on paper it's very little, like is it 1 week or something like that. But then when you add all the public holidays, it's actually more than in Finland, where we get 5 weeks per year of holidays.
Yeah, well, in China, you're according to the labor law, the first year you give people 5 days paid leave. And then that increases, I think, 5 days. I think it's the first year is 5 years, and the second year you go up. I think one year, I'm not actually, I can't remember the details, but it goes up. It goes up by each year that you work. The labor law requires extra time to be given. But yeah, it's the public holidays in China. I think it's around 11 days. It's not a huge number of days. But what they often do when they have holidays in China is that they will take days. So, for example, maybe you will have a Tuesday, which is the actual public holiday, and then they will make you work on Saturday, so that then they give you Monday. So it looks like you have Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. But in fact, you only have 1 day off because you have to work on Saturday. But the public holiday systems are quite disruptive, and it's something that foreigners have to get used to. That when the first thing is that public holidays are only. Everybody knows that there'll be a holiday for New Year, there'll be a holiday for May Day, there'll be a holiday for Dragon Boat Festival, for Qingming, for Tomb Sweeping. Everybody knows those holidays will be there, but they are not officially posted until December of the previous year. A few years ago, they were only posted in January of the same year, and because of that, there's a lot of confusion often about what day will actually be a holiday. So, for example, sometimes Chinese New Year in the past, Chinese New Year's Eve, and that's the big night where everybody will go home and have a big family dinner. Some years that's been a holiday. Some years it hasn't been a holiday. And generally you'll only know that, in December for an end of January or for a start of February holiday. So that's also quite a disruptive thing. But yeah, that's a little bit off topic. But yeah, you can give more than the labor law required holidays as a form of incentive to the workers. To your staff. That's also an option. In my experience, it is not used so much, but it's also something that maybe in the future will happen more.
How about flexible working times? Because I think I've noticed that people travel long times to their daily jobs. Commute is long. Do employees value that?
Well, the labor law is quite clear that you do not count your travel time to work as something that is a cost for the employer.
Yeah.
So if you decide to take a job and you have to travel 2 hours to get to the job, then that's basically your own decision. Mm-hmm. One thing that I've seen is that sometimes staff will come late to work, and they will say, "Oh, it's because I have a long commute." And this, in my opinion, and according to the labour law, is something that is absolutely not acceptable. But some Western managers seem to accept it, but a Chinese manager would definitely not accept people being late for work. If you say 8 o'clock, you need to be there at 8 o'clock, and if you're not there at 8 o'clock, then certain measures can be taken. So I think that that the distance for travelling to work is that's the decision that you make when you accept a job. When you start the interview process, you know where the job is, you know yourself how long it will take to get there. So if you accept that, then you also have to accept the responsibility to get to work on time.
One of the most common excuses of our employees for being late is that the subway was broken or somehow delayed. Is that really true, or is it broken?
It depends on the situation. I mean, anything can happen with Chinese city transport. I remember my son one time, he was catching a bus home, and he left the school at 3:30, and he got home at 9:30, and his phone had run out of battery, so we couldn't contact him, and we were very worried. And he walked home. He was, I think, he was about 12 at that time. And what had happened was that there was a huge traffic jam, and the buses, nothing was moving. So after 2 hours, he started walking home, and it took him a while to walk home. So things like that do happen. But if it happens regularly to the same people, then it's more likely an issue that they are just not leaving their home in time. And what I will do is I always had people clock in and clock out. I think it's even for me as general manager, I would clock in and clock out, because I think it is good that you have this type of discipline through the whole company, that people are expected, to do their time. But one thing that it also has to be clear is that for someone like a salesman, they actually work very long hours, because apart from office hours, they'll be in dinners, they'll be meeting with customers. And for those type of people, I'm willing to cut them a little bit of slack. For example, if I know that they are working over the weekend, and I'm sure that they've been working over the weekend with customers, for this dinner or that dinner. If a person like that is coming a little bit late to work sometimes, then I'll give it some slack. But in general, you should be in the office, when you are supposed to be. But for example, if people are traveling for work and they travel over the weekend, I think it is very correct and very proper that, of course, correct records need to be kept. But if people travel on a Saturday or a Sunday for work, then I think that and according to the labour law, but I also agree, that they are entitled to a day in lieu. So if you work on this Saturday, then you can take off one day later, in the time, to make up for that day. But you need to have your HR people taking very good records, and for the direct manager of that person to be confirming that they were actually working during that time before you give these compensated days.
The actual setting or situation of interview the potential employees, does it differ at all from the Western style?
Well, I think we were talking about this before. It's quite often, especially if you're just starting up and you don't have an office, it's very common for you to be interviewing people in a hotel lobby. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you might even have a first meeting over a meal or something like that. This is more the case if you're setting up in a new location, you don't have your offices there, or maybe you are going to replace someone and you want to meet them completely out of the office to make sure that the person who has been replaced doesn't realize that you are interviewing for his replacement. So in general, for the lower level positions, it happens in the company. What we would do, for example, with the worker, for example, we would tell our staff, "Oh, we're looking for seven workers," and then the people would introduce the people from the village or their friends and families. "Oh, I know this person. They're a good person. They'll be a good worker," and they would come to the company. They would have a very short, informal meeting with their team leader. Their team leader, maybe they will know them from the village, maybe they wouldn't, but they would have a little bit of a chat with them to see that they, what they thought of that person. And then if the team leader was okay, they would send them to the HR department, who would then take their details, make a copy of their ID card, get them to fill in an application form, and that was all the paperwork that was needed. Well, that was the process of the interview. But if you're looking, and especially it's a little bit of an issue if you are in a more remote location. It's quite difficult sometimes to find the exact skill set that you need in that local area. And in that case, it's quite common for people to try to attract employees from out of state or out of the city or out of the state. And in China, of course, people are more flexible and more movable than they have been in the past. But still, in general, for a person who was going to move from, for example, move from Beijing to Shanghai, this would be seen as a very big step. I think if you're in Finland and someone said, "I have a job for you in Stockholm, would you be interested?" I think that type of move mentally is less hard to make than someone who's moving from Shanghai to Beijing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, if you're going to invite someone to, or if you're trying to get someone to move, of course, you will pay for them to come to the city. You'll pay for their hotel. You'll pay for their accommodation. You'll show them the company. You might even, sometimes you'll take them for a tour of the city so that they can get a feeling of what it's like, to live in that city. So this is something that's a little bit different, because I know in Australia, if you are interviewing for a position in a city outside of your home city, it's normally you as the employee who will pay the cost to go and visit the new company. But in China, if you're going for an interview, then the company will pay all your costs in general. Maybe there are some special situations, but in my experience, that's how it is. That's how it normally is.
Interesting. In the actual interview situation, what are the red flags for you that something is not right, and which gets you worried about the candidate?
Well, I mean, just say that we're going with a recruiter. Sometimes people, and of course, when these red flags come up, you will straight away stop the search on that person. And for me, if I see people have been changing work too quickly, and when I mean too quickly, I mean that they stay in a company or they stay in several companies for 6 months or less than 6 months, then I would think that this person has an issue. Maybe the issue is that they are so good that they always get new offers and people will give them a big raise for them to move. But I think that this type of person will not be a long-term person in your company. And if you can't get 2 to 3 years out of a person, then it's not worth it. So for me, this would be a red flag, and this would be something that I would see when the recruiting company brings CVs to us.
I think maybe we can touch on a little bit upon this labor law as it regards to the employment contracts. Isn't it a little bit different from the West, that they are basically all fixed term?
Well, it's like this. The labor law the Chinese labor law is based on German labor law. So I think in fact, excuse me, I think in fact that the concepts are quite similar to what people have in Europe. So for any contract, you need to have a starting and ending time. That's in China anyway. That's not just a a labor law, but it needs to say when the contract will start and when the contract will stop. And then what happens in China is that you will have two fixed term, and the fixed term can be 1 year, can be less, it can be more, but you will have two fixed term contracts. And when you have extended your contract for the second time, then on the second extension, it will need to become basically a permanent. It can become a permanent contract with no end date. So just say I have a contract for 1 year. I'll extend it for 1 year. I've been working for the company for 2 years. And then when I extend it on the second time, then I can, as the employee, I can ask that I want to have another fixed term for a year. But I can also say, now that this is my second extension, I want an unlimited extension. As the company, you can only say, I'll offer you an unlimited contract on the second extension. You don't have the right to say, I only want to sign for 2 years with this staff. That is against the labor law.
If I want to fire a person during the fixed period, is it possible, or do I have to still pay him like the rest of the?
No. What happens is, this is the thing that a lot of people feel nervous, and not just companies, staff, they feel nervous about signing a long-term contract. But in fact, if you want, either as the employee or the employer, if you want to terminate a labor contract, regardless of if it is in the probation time, or if it is in the fixed term time, or if it is in the unfixed time, which is basically permanent contract, there are very clear ways to stop the contract. So firstly, I work for you. I'm in the probation time. I don't like this job. So I come in and I say, Arthur, I'm not happy here. This is my last day. I'm leaving. And maybe you and I will have a discussion about whether we will stay or not. But in the probation time, no notice needs to be given. So also, you don't need to give any notice to me if you don't want me to continue. So in probation time, no notice needs to be given. In the fixed term contract, you can set in the labor contract itself how much time needs to be given, but the minimum time that a company needs to give to his employee is 1 month. So during the fixed term contract, if you want to fire me, you need to give me 1 month's notice. And then at the end of that 1 month, of course, I'm getting paid for that 1 month. Then you need to give me 1 month for every calendar year that I've worked for you. So just say I've worked for you for 1 year, and then at the end of that year, you want to fire me. You give me 1 month's notice. So I'm working for another month. And then at the end of that month, I get my normal salary plus 1 month for the full year that I've worked for you in the past. You can also fire people immediately, but you must give them that 1 month's wage as well. So, for example, I've worked for you for 1 year and you want to fire me immediately, then you give me 2 months' salary that day and I'm gone. So that's how it's working in China.
Do I need to have a valid reason for firing, or can it be just
You can have a reason for firing. You can have a valid reason for firing, but as long as you pay the compensation, even if they take you to court, then it's the court will say that you gave your proper compensation out. If, for example, there was a bonus that was due and you fired them at a time when the bonus should have been paid, legally speaking, a bonus is not something that can be compensated out. But if it appears and if the employee has some type of proof or can explain in a very reasonable way, logical way, that they were fired just so that the bonus would not be paid, then maybe then the arbitration committee would rule that a bonus must be paid. But in my experience, this is not the case. In my experience, when someone has gone to arbitration, the most that they can ask for is that their wage is paid in full.
And I think it's pretty expected that if a Western company and a Chinese employee go to court, the decision is, I think, pretty expected to go more to one side than the other.
Well, I would say that the labor law is protecting the employee. So I think that if you're working for a Chinese company or a foreign company, you can expect that the labor law will protect the employee. I think that's a good way to say that. On the other hand, if you work for a state-owned enterprise, which is owned by the government, then they have a lot of power to influence the labor arbitration people. And I've also known when I've been working for state-owned enterprises or with joint ventures with state-owned enterprises, that if you have labor problems and the person goes to the labor arbitration to sue the company, it's quite often that the state-owned enterprise will find people who work in a senior level in the labor bureau, and they will explain the situation, and then that person's application for arbitration will be dismissed. So in that case, you definitely, as a foreign company, you don't have that type of advantage to give your side of the story to senior people in the labor arbitration or in the labor department.
Yeah, and what comes to salary, I noticed that one talent or one skill which really raises the expectations for salary
is English.
English, yes.
Yeah,
it's surprising, like how much actually.
Well, and unfortunately, another issue is that sometimes people who have good English, but not much else, they are able to always impress foreigners because they speak English. They're able to get jobs very easily, but then when they join the company, the employers realize that this person, maybe they're not very clever. And then they don't stay very long in the company because they don't get promoted, or maybe they're asked to leave. And so this is something, and it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because most managers, especially the foreign managers who are only going to China for a relatively short time, a few years, they will never get to the level of Chinese where they can operate fully in Chinese language. And so they always rely on people who speak Chinese, people who speak English. And in that case, if you're hiring someone and there are two people and they seem on paper to be both the same, to have the same skills and similar experience, but one speaks good English, of course, if you don't speak Chinese, you will take the English speaker. And then, so no matter what you do, if you speak English at a high level, then in a Western company you have a big advantage, and they use that advantage to get a higher compensation.
I noticed even in Finland, I may be insulting a lot of people with this statement, but I've noticed that people in sales usually have the poorest language skills. Not necessarily, of course, people who do international business, but if you do sales just in Finland, I think they're very good using Finnish language, but not necessarily good in English. So kind of using this analogy, would you rather hire a great salesman who doesn't speak English and then use translator all the time, or moderately good salesperson who does speak English?
It depends what your choices are, because if you have quite a lot of choice, and you don't have to make too much of a sacrifice on either side, either the language side or the skill side, then then you would just find the best of the bunch. But quite often, if you are in specific industries, for example, I've been in the agricultural industry for a while now, the people in this industry in China in general do not speak English. So if you are looking for someone that speaks English, and if that is a hard requirement for you, then you are most likely not going to find someone that is highly skilled in sales or technical issues. So if you look for someone, for example, who's been in the trade business, just trading and selling, most likely those people will speak a lot of English because they've been doing trade and they've been dealing with foreigners a lot. So in that type of industry, if you want someone that knows the job and knows English, you can have the best of both worlds. But in an industry or an area outside of Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, where you are requiring English and a skill set, that becomes very difficult. And I've seen it going in two ways. Sometimes people will have a translator, sometimes people won't. But in my experience, and what I would recommend is that you get someone who is good at the job, and then you, as the Western manager, find a way to communicate with that person. So that is either through an interpreter, through someone who speaks English in your company, or you find that you can, because quite often in China people can read and write English much better than they can speak it. And maybe that all your communication with this person will be through emails. Often for salespeople, they're never in the office anyway. But maybe you just know that you will have to rely on this as your main form of communication, and then sometimes for more in-depth conversations, you get someone who speaks English in your company to be the interpreter. This I would suggest is probably the better way to go. Of course, I think if you're managing people, you need to be able to speak their language. So I think that in the long term, the Western managers have to be able to speak some level of Chinese, even if it's just enough that when they are talking to that person in English through an interpreter, that they know enough of what is said in Chinese to know that the interpreter is saying what they are saying what you are saying in English, and that the staff member, when they reply in Chinese, it's the same as what the interpreter has said, because you'll be really scared to know how often interpreters intentionally or unintentionally get it wrong, or intentionally, give a different translation for their own benefit. So I think that's basically an important task for a foreign manager in China, that they get some level of Chinese that allows them to at least do a double check on their own translator.
I don't speak Chinese myself yet, but I think I'm gonna start studying it, and I'm thinking that I will not tell any of our employees in China that I'm studying it. So little by little, as I learn, I will start understanding what they're saying. Of course, I get a sense of what they're talking, and then after 2 years, I'm thinking I'm gonna just say a really long, complicated sentence, and then they realize that actually I've been able to speak the language the whole time. That's my mischievous plan.
Then you won't be speaking English again, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But I think that in general, the younger people in China have a much higher ability to speak and listen to English, and I think that's partly because people are watching a lot of TV on the internet, and TV on the internet is often not dubbed. It's just taken directly from overseas broadcasts. And actually, language is just something that you need to use and listen to. And most, if you look on the official TV or in movies, most things, if not everything, is dubbed. So like in Russia, people don't hear English, on the TV or when they watch TV or when they watch movies. It's all dubbed, and so if you don't even hear the language, of course, it's difficult to learn how to understand it. But with younger people, they're looking at a lot of original language movies, mainly in English, with subtitles, and that helps them to be able to work with spoken English.
Yeah, I think the subtitles is the only way to go. In terms of if you're a person in a country making decisions, you learn English by listening, and you also learn to read your own language much faster because you want to keep up when you're a kid.
Yeah. So I think this is a little bit similar to, I think in Russia it's the same. They always dub their movies, and because of that, people don't listen so often to spoken English. I don't know. Do you think that the level in Russia of spoken English is higher in China if you compare a big city like Moscow or St. Petersburg to Beijing and Shanghai?
I think it's very industry dependent. I've actually used the tactic because in using English language as a filter for example, when I'm looking for a subcontractor, like a web developer or somebody, I may write the initial inquiry in English just to make sure that they have somebody who speaks English and understands, hence the Western, at least a little bit of Western type style of doing business.
Right.
And actually, quite often they have responded in very good English. But then, like you said, spoken is a completely different matter. And,
yeah.
Russians are famous for having a strong accent in English.
And also the other thing is, like, for example, if you study Chinese and people realize that you can use Chinese for your communication, you'll find that most people will be switching to Chinese very quickly because, that is the language of that they are best in and easiest for them to communicate in.
Yeah, they will not do the French thing that because you do not speak French, they will not speak to you in French.
No, not at all. People are very happy to speak to you in Chinese, and they're very happy that you take the effort to learn Chinese. So this is a big plus.
Yeah.
So basically, it's like you said, it is industry specific about whether or not you can require people, or that you can legitimately put must speak English as a step for not employing people. I know that some companies are adamant that they want to be able to speak, with their salesmen. But on the other hand, I know in the agricultural business that if you want a really good salesman, the chance that he will be able to speak really good English is very low.
Yeah. How have you found your best employees? Do you have a trick that you use, or?
I think sometimes it's a little bit of luck, that you find the right person. I remember when I was in a satellite town outside Kunming in Yunnan province, we were looking for a technical manager, and we really had a lot of trouble to find one. It was difficult. We were sort of asking around our managers if there was anyone that they could recommend. No, there was not, and we were looking on recruitment sites for CVs that people posted, and then our HR manager found the CV of a person who was working for Pepsi in Kunming City, but they were from our satellite city, and they wanted to move home, closer to their parents. And that person was very well trained. They also spoke English, which was a plus. And they had a background in a large company which had very good structures for maintenance and repair and health and safety. So this was really for us, like gold falling from the sky. But sometimes it can happen like this. But in general, I think the secret is that you know the the internet sites, the recruitment sites that people are looking at in your industry or in your area, and you advertise on those sites. I think that's in this day and age that's the crucial thing for mid-level managers. And for senior managers, unfortunately, I think recruiters are still the best way.
I think I remember last time we talked, you said that it's not common in China to call the previous employer.
No. Chinese companies are very, very rarely doing this. Western companies do it quite often. And I remember I had a finance person who I think they really had some type of mental breakdown. Anyway, they had huge problems for me and really went out of their way to make my life difficult. So when they were going for another job and they knew the company that was thinking about hiring them, when their HR manager called me, I was very happy to be very honest and say exactly, what had happened and what I thought. I didn't give any other comments. I just said, this is what happened. And I'm sure that they wouldn't have gotten the job. But in general, people are not calling previous employers. And I feel that unless this changes, when people are leaving their job, and I've noticed this, and maybe we can talk about this in another show because it's probably worth an hour, that when people leave your company, even though they've been working with you, for maybe 10 years, I find that sometimes they can really turn into a completely different person, quite nasty and mean and not cooperative. And I think that in that field or in that aspect of professionalism, people on average still have a long way to go.
Are they just trying to get the bonus of getting fired and getting 10-month or 10-year salary?
No. Normally what happens is that you have people who they are going to leave. And they have told you that they're going to leave, and then you are trying to keep them for long enough to do a handover. And to do a handover, you need to have a new person. So, that can take, according to the labor law, they need to give you at least 1 month's notice. But quite often for people, even if they've been working for you for a long time, they can come in the morning and say, I'm going to leave the company. And you say, oh, okay, that's a surprise. I thought you were happy here. When are you thinking about leaving? Today. And it's like, come on, you have a very senior position, you're a finance manager or you're a technical manager. We need to do a handover. Oh, okay, I'll stay for a week. And, it's then it's in the last month or however long you negotiate with them to work with them, you see how the person really is. And quite often, even if they're in a very complex job, they refuse to hand over, or they're in a complex job and you ask them to do a handover to the new person. And then you ask, has the handover been done? Yes, handover has been done. And quite often what happens is the new person is nervous of upsetting the situation, and they will say, oh, yes, when that person is there, they'll say, yeah, the handover has been done. Then the person leaves, and the new person says, nothing was handed over. I don't know where anything is. And so that's why you really have to make sure, and that's when it's important that the manager knows more or less, not exactly all the fine details, but the overall details of what each person does. Okay, for example, do you have the codes for the computer system? Yes. Okay, please show me. Oh, I don't have them.
Right.
Okay. And we had, for example, issues with an IT person. And when they left, they caused all manner of problems for us. And we were very lucky that the new person that we had hired was much smarter than the old person. And they were able to very quickly deny them all access to the server, all remote access. But it was only because that person was, really quite clever with the network. But, the issue is that, when that person leaves, maybe, because he's so clever, he'll be causing you more problems than you can imagine. So it's like I said, when people are leaving the company, maybe it's because, like you said, they're not, like you asked, when they are going for a new job, it's not the habit in China for the new manager or the new HR director to call the previous companies, and because of that, maybe they don't care too much about their relationship when they're leaving the company. And that's I think a real pity, because it will be that in the future, when you hire someone, you will want to really do a better due diligence than is being done at the present, and that will involve a phone call to their previous managers. And then, if they've been really difficult in their leaving time, then obviously that hiring manager will not be getting a good impression of them.
Right. Cool.
So I think sort of maybe to sum it up is that for a new position or a new person, you need the hiring manager needs to be quite clear to know, what is the actual work and what is the actual responsibilities of this position. Who is the manager? Who will they manage? And this has to be all clear right from the start. And then something else that is very important is that you have a useful indoctrination process that they can get, up to speed as soon as possible.
Right. Okay. I think we've done quite in detail about different aspects of the recruiting and actual employment of Chinese employees. Yeah. Anything else to add, or should we wrap it up? And
I think that's sort of for the start of the recruitment process. That's probably enough said at the moment. But maybe in a later episode we can talk a little bit more about management, and also when you want someone, or you're not happy with someone's performance, how to try and correct that. And if you decide or they have decided that they're going to leave the company, how that is managed, and if it ends nastily, how to manage a labor dispute when it goes legal.
Right. Sounds like a good topic.
Yeah, not a fun one, but a good one.
Yeah, I think quite useful for many listeners.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for your time.
Have a good Sunday.
Yep. Enjoy your work day, right? Although it's Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, thanks for the time. Talk to you later.
All right. Talk to you.